Welcome to this explainer. Right now, global trade policy is undergoing a massive, literally tectonic shift, and it completely alters the reality for supply chain managers, business owners, and importers today. We're facing a landscape where the financial stakes have honestly never been higher. We're talking about unprecedented billions of dollars moving across a brand new tariff ledger. On one side of this ledger, we have the potential for massive financial rewards in the form of historic duty refunds, but on the exact opposite side, we're looking at severe new risks. We've got sweeping international investigations, stacking duties, and high-stakes legal battles that could completely rewrite your entire compliance strategy.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really understand our current landscape, we have to look at the sheer scale of the Supreme Court's recent decision regarding the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA. Basically, the Supreme Court ruled that using this 1977 sanctions law to impose sweeping tariffs was a massive overstep of presidential authority, effectively invalidating them. But, as you can imagine, that legal victory immediately created a huge logistical question for both the government and for businesses. How do you actually unwind a tariff program of this magnitude?
To put that magnitude into perspective for a second, up to $166 billion in collections are now subject to Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, refunds. I mean, it's not every day you see the government scrambling to give back $166 billion to the private sector. And this isn't some distant down-the-road promise either. CBP has estimated that the very first electronic automated clearinghouse refunds will start hitting designated bank accounts as early as May 11th or 12th.
So, here is our roadmap for today. We'll look at the EPA tariff refunds, navigating the cap system, those sweeping Section 301 investigations, Section 122 legal challenges, and finally, deadlines and action steps.
Section 1. The IEPA tariff refunds.
So the Supreme Court's ruling in Learning Resources, Inc. v. Trump was an absolute watershed moment. It confirmed the executive branch just couldn't rely on IEPA to impose these tariffs. But while that legal victory successfully stopped the bleeding, it didn't automatically dictate how businesses would actually get their money back. The Court of International Trade, or CIT, actually had to step in and order CBP to commence the process of refunding these tariffs to importers. And as any trade professional knows, navigating the bureaucracy of customs refunds is incredibly complex, especially when you're dealing with billions of dollars across countless individual entries.
Section 2. Navigating the CAPE system.
Now, CBP's answer to processing these massive, unprecedented refund claims is a brand new automated portal called the CAPE system, which stands for the Consolidated Administration and Processing of Entries. Here's the four-step journey your claim is actually going to take. First, an importer of record or their authorized broker uploads a list of eligible entries directly to the CAPE portal. Once that's accepted, Step 2 kicks in. This is where CBP uses a mass processing module to remove the specific IEPA harmonized tariff schedule numbers and recalculate what is actually owed. Step 3 involves reviewing and liquidating, or reliquidating, those entries alongside calculating any interest owed to you. And finally, Step 4 is the Consolidated Electronic Refund Distribution. CBP stated that valid refunds should generally be issued within 60 to 90 days following the acceptance of your declaration, assuming, of course, the government portal doesn't crash.
But listen, you really need to exercise caution here. The system currently deployed is only Phase 1, and it has some very strict limitations. It's primarily built for simpler situations, meaning formal and informal entries that are either unliquidated or were liquidated within the last 80 days. Crucially, it excludes entries with outstanding protests, as well as older entries where liquidation has become final. Plus, any refunds are subject to potential offsets if you happen to owe other duties. Because of all these uncertainties, and the fact that the Department of Justice still has until June 6 to potentially appeal the CIT's refund order, legal experts are strongly advising a dual-track strategy. You absolutely need to engage with the CAPE system, but you should also be filing CIT lawsuits and timely CBP administrative protests just to fully protect your rights.
This brings up a vital point, especially for the construction sector and contractors. If you're a contractor, you might not be the actual importer of record who receives that direct deposit from CBP. Usually that goes to a manufacturer or distributor. So contractors need to be extremely proactive right now. Go check your supplier contracts to see if they address pass-through credits. You literally need to ask your suppliers if they're pursuing these CAPE refunds, and make sure that those incoming duty credits are actually passed down to the project level.
Section 3. Sweeping Section 301 investigations.
Pivoting from the rewards of potential refunds to the very real risks of new costs, let's see how this builds into the broader trade landscape. Back in mid-March of 2026, the Office of the United States Trade Representative, the USTR, initiated two massive new investigations under Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974. These two investigations are distinctly different and target entirely different aspects of the global supply chain. On one side, we have an economic probe into structural excess capacity, targeting 16 economies. That includes major powers like China, the EU, and Japan, across critical manufacturing sectors like steel, aluminum, batteries, and semiconductors. On the other side, we have a probe with a humanitarian and regulatory focus, a forced labor investigation targeting a staggering 60 economies.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the core justification the USTR is using for the excess capacity investigation. They are looking at global manufacturing utilization hovering around 75%, which is well below healthy benchmarks. But more importantly, they're targeting non-market practices, like subsidized lending, that create what economists ironically call zombie firms. These are unprofitable foreign companies that are essentially kept alive on life support by government policy. That leads to massive overproduction, which then gets dumped onto the global market, directly displacing U.S. domestic production.
And the scope of the forced labor probe is even more expansive. Get this, the 60 economies under investigation represent over 99% of U.S. imports. That is huge. This is a highly novel approach by the USTR. Historically, forced labor enforcement focused on stopping specific, tainted goods from entering the country. Now, the USTR is treating a foreign government's actual failure to adopt and effectively enforce their own forced labor bans as an unreasonable trade practice that burdens U.S. commerce. This represents a massive shift from targeting individual companies to holding entire sovereign regulatory systems accountable. And that could absolutely lead to widespread tariffs or import restrictions.
Section 4. Section 122, Legal Challenges.
Adding another whole layer of complexity to this landscape, those temporary 10% global tariffs implemented back on February 24th under Section 122 are now facing severe scrutiny in the courts. Two major lawsuits have been filed at the Court of International Trade challenging presidential authority here. First up, we have State of Oregon v. Trump. This is a coalition of 24 states basically arguing that the fundamental statutory conditions required to implement Section 122 tariffs were simply not met. Second, we have Burlap and Barrel Inc. v. Trump. This suit takes a different angle. It argues that the administration improperly conflated general trade deficits with the highly specific economic concept of balance of payments deficits, which is what Section 122 was actually written to address. Furthermore, they argue that applying Section 122 this broadly violates the non-delegation doctrine, essentially giving the executive branch taxing powers that constitutionally belong to Congress.
So the crucial point is understanding how all of these different mechanisms interact with each other. We are dealing with Section 301 tariffs on China, which remain in full force, by the way, Section 232 tariffs on items like steel and aluminum, and potentially these Section 122 global tariffs. When these duties stack on top of standard most favored nation rates, an importer's effective duty rate can easily shoot past 50%. In a world of stacked tariffs, classification accuracy isn't just a compliance issue anymore. It is literally a critical matter of financial survival.
Section 5. Deadlines and Action Steps.
With all these unprecedented rewards and risks in play, what do supply chain managers and compliance teams need to be prioritizing right now? Let's walk through this critical timeline like a countdown. By April 15th, written comments and hearing requests for the USTR's 301 investigations were due. Late April and early May see the public hearings kicking off in Washington, D.C. for both forced labor and excess capacity. June 6th is a massive date. That's the Department of Justice's deadline to potentially appeal the IEEPA tariff refunds. But look further ahead to November 10th, 2026. This is the expiration date for the 178 active China Section 301 exclusions, which cover things like solar manufacturing equipment and various specific products. Trade experts are warning that this should be treated as a hard stop. Those exclusions were designed as a transition period to find alternative sourcing, not as a permanent carve-out.
I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Is your supply chain built for yesterday's tariffs or tomorrow's investigations? You need to finalize your Cap A portal claims to secure those refunds, implement that dual-track legal strategy, and rigorously review your sourcing against the 60 economies currently under the USTR's forced labor microscope. The ledger is being completely rewritten, and it's up to you to ensure your business comes out on the right side of the balance sheet. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep analyzing, keep adapting, and I'll see you next time.